Hello, everybody. This is Bob Lohr. I'm Chief Marketing Officer with Celerity. I'd like to welcome you to today's webinar presentation entitled Data Mapping, Cloud-Based Organizations and an Emerging AI World. Again, thank you for joining today. This is our second of our different webinars we've been putting on. And if you'd like to go to the next slide, please. There we go. We're going to be covering quite a few areas relative to data mapping. The four main areas of the presentation are going to be what it is and really the growing importance it plays in the role, especially with the advent and growth of AI in the legal industry. Also, implications of what AI can and can't do as it relates to data mapping is a big category we'll talk about. Another topic will be how to define data mapping strategies and tactics as you plan and execute your initiatives at your law firm or corporation. And then lastly, we'll touch base on how to develop your overall tactics to uncover specific client landscapes, of which in many cases are very, very different. As we progress throughout today's webinar, everybody, we're going to hold your questions till the very end. If you could, enter them into the Teams chat box. We'll answer them at the end of the webinar. We'll probably have about 40-45 minutes worth of content and maybe hopefully 5-10 minutes of questions. So please do that and we'll address those accordingly. And then lastly, tomorrow morning, we will send out one more email marketing campaign to everybody that RSVP'd for this event, which will be a link to our post-webinar landing page where you can access and watch the recorded webinar, get a copy of the slides in PDF format, as well as take a quick 2-question anonymous survey to let us know how we did. So with that, first of all, I'd like to tell you a little bit about, for those of you that may not be familiar with Celerity and its division called Celerity Discovery, this is just a little bit about us. I'm not going to read this, but essentially it's one of the 3 divisions of the corporate entity called Celerity. As a subsidiary, Celerity Discovery is essentially we provide 5 different things: e-discovery, data analysis, expert witness, and incident response services to both law firms and corporate and government agencies. So it's the subdivision within our utilities organization. And what really truly makes Celerity Discovery unique is the deep roots that we have in complex data analysis. The people you're going to meet today on this call, on this webinar, all come from different areas of both data mapping, e-discovery on both the law firm and corporate side and e-discovery side. So we've got a lot of experience across all aspects of the EDRM. And the ultimate goal of what we do is really we try to help clients convert raw data into clean intelligence that they can use to optimize their cases and mitigate risk. That's just a little bit about us, and the rest is going to be all about you and what you need to know today. So with that, I'd like to kind of briefly introduce the 3 or 4 people that we're going to have talking today, I being the 4th behind the scenes. Each of these people are going to bring a different element of expertise to the presentation today. Bryant and Charles are both employees at Celerity Discovery and run the organization, as well as are experts in all aspects of data mapping. We have a guest speaker today from the client side named Dave Carnes, who is the Chief Information Officer at Beverage and Diamond, who has a very broad range of skill sets ranging from everything from sales, marketing, legal, attorney to IT. So we a lot of different perspectives. So with that, I'm going to go behind the scenes, everybody, and hand it off to Bryant Gauthier. And Bryant, take it away.
Hey, thanks, Bob. My name is Bryant Gauthier. I'm the Vice President of Celerity Discovery. I'm happy everyone could join us today. Briefly about myself, for my career, I've really been focused on helping legal teams efficiently apply and use technology to serve their clients better. I've been doing legal services for 22 years now, 20 of those in e-discovery. Worked at a number of firms: Skadden Arps, Buckley Sandler, Finnegan Henderson, Xerox, and now I'm at Celerity Consulting. So from a standpoint of, I've been worked on a lot of complex and big litigation from highly regulated industries like energy and banking and finance, healthcare, manufacturing, and government, state and federal litigation investigations. But data mapping is important no matter what size case you're working on, right? It's something that I've been doing for almost 20 years now, and I find it the most interesting and foundational and important part of getting ready for litigation or investigation on the e-discovery side. So I'm excited to talk about our topic today with Charles and Dave. I've known Dave for almost 15 years. He's a thought leader, someone I highly respect and glad to know very well. And Charles is great. as my colleague, and I think this is going to be a really great discussion today about data mapping, because again, it's really important, especially in the context of the rapid adoption, as Bob alluded to, of AI in legal services of all types, right? So data mapping, what is it? We're going with a really broad definition here. We're not talking about mapping data from one workspace in a field of data to another. We're really looking at the whole landscape, the big footprint, the big data footprint of an organization, right? In the context of some event that has kicked off or initiated an investigation or litigation, or maybe even some compliance or HR kind of like internal investigation, right? So think about it this way. It's the applications and software, storage, be it physical storage, or more likely some network or cloud storage, data and document types used by your client or customer, right? What are they doing in their business? It's really good information to kind of like ferret out and figure out at the beginning. We really is focused on cloud because it makes it so much more difficult to understand someone's data footprint for their organization. But people still have stuff on premise, so you can't forget about that. Historical data. This is really kind of interesting because litigation, a period of litigation for that's in question, right, can be more than 1 year, and it maybe go back many years, right? So things change, and that becomes very important. These two next things, backups and data retention policies, it's going to differ depending on what system you're talking about for your client, likely. And then I think always in the context of all these questions is, how is your client using the data, and how are the end users, the day-to-day users of the data, using that information? And besides e-discovery, there's other areas that use data mapping as well, right? At a macro sense, right? It is data governance, right? Understanding the data you have, so you can build a data retention program that you're maintaining the data for business needs or compliance needs or legal needs, right? Cybersecurity, to secure that data from outside threats from your organization, or make sure internal people have the right access and control. The last thing is data migrations. It's very hard to move your environment from one place to another if you don't actually know what you have, right? So it's kind of a more practical item there. So there's a lot of reasons why data mapping is important. And I think it becomes even more important when we think in the context of AI. So here I just wanted to point out in the EDRM, the data mapping really kind of rolls up. I think of it as a few things all together, right? When you're starting a case, and I'm going to use case kind of generically, that involves both a litigation and an investigation, right? So case, it really involves the identification, preservation, collection, and analysis of what you have. And you kind of, sometimes you're doing all those things at one time. You're talking to your client, figuring things out. So I just wanted to point that out in where we're talking about within the EDRM, right? And really, what makes this interesting, I think, is the data mapping, as I mentioned, is foundational to artificial intelligence, because really your data is telling you, your artificial intelligence program is telling you what's hidden in your data. Your data is teaching the model. You're testing your model against the data. So it's really the artificial intelligence relies on your data for your results, right? So it's very interconnected to what you're going to, your final product really is connected to what you're putting into it at the beginning, right? And why is this so important? It's not just what you put in and what you get out. That sounds like it's the same thing in the EDRM if you're not using AI, right? If you don't collect everything, it's bad. But here, it's really about, if you're using a model, right? You're training the model on the data you collected. You're testing the model on the data you collected, and the product is the subset of data you may be producing for your case, right? And then also, if you don't have all your data, even if you have a good model that you built on another test set of data, maybe for the same client or similar client or same industry, even if you had a model that worked well and was complete, if you don't collect all your data, you're going to run your model and you not know that you're missing information. And that's the big thing. You're missing information that could help you. You're missing information that you should know about that could hurt you, or you're missing producing documents that you need to produce or are required to produce. So it's really a byproduct of using these powerful tools. You have to make sure that you set the foundation correctly and make sure you have all the relevant material when you're using these. And problems with data mapping, if you miss something, it could be a substantive issue, right? You're missing information that undermines your position. Or the next one I think is actually even more difficult to explain is if your opposition has something that you should have, you thought you would have, and you don't have it, but they have it, that's difficult. And two, the last one, procedural issues, that's really kind of the worst case scenario, is that that you've missed something that's so important that calls into question your entire EDRM process, right? Which could be very expensive, time consuming, and difficult to explain. Um, from a standpoint of like the mapping and formatting and tracking for a data map, there's a lot of ways of doing this, right? You can use diagrams and charts, lists and reports. Usually it's a combination of these. And what information does it track? It kind of pulls together information, as I mentioned earlier, about systems, document types, data governance, backups, any changes in the systems for an organization, right? Because if you think about it, litigations goes on for a while, organizations change and evolve over time, and with that, all their technology and systems and documents can change with them, right? Really, it's in the details, these data maps, right? This here on the right, email, computers, other, is something I received at one point. So it's really peeling back the layers of the departments, the people, the technology used, the frontline employees, and any other details that impact the data in question for the case. And you really have to dig into this, and it's a top-down and bottom-up approach. So here, diagrams are great, gives you that 50,000-foot view. But usually you dive into having some type of report, be it in a database or Power BI. We used to use Excel a lot to do this. Now we're using more databases to grab this information, so it's more dynamic. You can pull reports, you can share it, multiple people can update it at one time. But really, we want to understand the changes and modifications to the systems over time for the period in question, right? So here, the top really gets to, for generic organization, some systems they may have, right? Email, maybe it's Outlook, maybe it's Gmail for business, sales, purchasing, a finance billing system, a customer service system. Maybe they have a call center, right? So they have audio files and a call center support system, inventory. Maybe it's inventory of things they're selling. Maybe it's inventory of assets they have. Training. A lot of highly regulated industries, be it healthcare, banking, finance, manufacturing, utilities, all have training requirements from different agencies. And then contractors, services, of all sorts. So here in this bottom grid, you see the cells in yellow. Those are years 3 through 8 that we gathered information for my example. And those are the years in question, right? So it's always good to maybe expand your time period a little bit so you understand maybe there's systems before and after, how they evolved and changed. And really that's what we're interested in, is really figuring out that we don't leave anything, any good footage on the cutting room floor for our movie, right? The story we're going to tell, that we have everything we need. So it's really, you want to be as detailed as you can when you're doing this, and appropriate for your project, right? So as I was discussing earlier to a colleague, you don't want to build a battleship for a one-person internal investigation and go through this the same process you would for having an investigation from 7 different state attorney generals, right? But you want to make sure you're thorough for what you need. So here we have some information on the different systems, right? So email, and let me interpret this for you, right? And you can use your own nomenclature and things, but we had one system for email for the first 3 years, and then a second system, and then in year 8 there was a third system, right? For sales and purchasing, there's one system, and then year 7, we add another one, and there continues to be 2. So these, oh, my apologies. Over time, things change within companies, right? So finance and billing, they had one system until year 5, and then there was a test system, FBT, T is for test. So this can be very esoteric, and you can see that sometimes there's a lot of change, sometimes there's not. Think about how businesses grow, right? They acquire other companies, they merge with other companies. So there's a lot of reasons why, from a business standpoint, you'll see multiple systems, right? A good example is a bank, right? Think of a bank. Let's simplify it, where it has a banking, a personal loan division, home mortgage division, an auto loan division, right? Those are basically 3 different companies under the same flag, right? So they could all have different tracking systems, um, different customer service systems, and banks did a lot of merging together about 15, 16 years ago, right, during the financial crisis. So a lot of banks, there's duplicative systems, and they have historical systems too that are too big to change. So there's a lot of reasons why you'll stumble across, for small businesses and large businesses, multiple systems, right? The one here that I think is really interesting is the call center. A lot of different industries have call centers, from banking to healthcare, technology support, right? And I stumbled across years ago a company that every single year they changed their call center support system and audio system, right? So every single year it was different, which meant different backups, time periods, different formats of data. So those are other things too. It's not just the when do you have the data, but what format is it in as well. Um, and here's the last slide about this simplified data map. Um, I think the one that's interesting here I'll call out is that services contractor, for example, that for many years they just had one, and then they added some, and then maybe in year 6 they had a big project, so they had a lot of other contractors, and maybe SC is actually the prime contractor, and you have subcontractors come and go depending on the projects they're doing, right? So that could add different systems that they have access to. They may not use them every single day. They may not even own them or run them. They're just accessing data, logging in, running reports. But those could be something that you need to get at least information from as well. And then the collaboration. Think of this as things like Teams, Slack, Zoom, Jira, applications that allow you to share information. And sometimes you'll be like, well, why don't we have information for Jenny or Jim from year 3 and 4? Well, they didn't have those systems those years, right? So systems come online as technology evolves. You may not always have all the data for the the years you have in question. So overall, the emergence and evolution of advanced software analytics and now AI really makes this more important, right? Because you need to think about what you're putting in. There's not as many people looking at it throughout the process, right? When you're using these systems, you're having your best people do more of the work, so there aren't as many people to look at the overall process of maybe the aspect of aggregating and collecting the material before you start analyzing it, right? And one of the interesting things that Dave's going to talk about, that we had a conversation a few weeks about, that I thought is always really fascinating, is rogue IT. This idea of things that are outside the purview of management and the purview of the IT department. So, anyways, it's always interesting to think about the 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 more powerful the software you're using, the more prep work you need to do as you're putting that in for your analysis. There's some other great things about doing this data mapping process. You're going to learn more about your client. from a personal standpoint, their culture, how they use technology, their internal processes, systems, um, and really, what can be collected and what should be collected, right? So you get to make those decisions about preservation versus collection, and then after collection versus processing, right? So it's kind of a nesting doll, right? You have the aggregate. Here's everything that could be collected, and a smaller subset of that is everything that we want to collect for that project, and then of that, what we did collect, this is what we're going to start processing with, right? And that could be a subset or a sampling to start out with, but gives you a lot of understanding of your client, their data, their information, and maybe the size of the effort to go through all that material with more powerful AI tools, or the number of people you're going to need to do certain aspects of the project. So overall, it's a lot of tactics and strategy of preparation. So this isn't just getting on a phone call for a large case and having one phone call and then you're ready. It's really about the preparation. I have a very long list and portfolio of questions and questionnaires that I can really tailor to the case and the client, right? And it's really understanding the case, the technology they're using, the industry they may be in. Maybe there's a certain file type or information or system or a compliance requirement that generates certain reports, and just really the culture of how they maintain their information, where they keep it. Do they have policies, right? That's step one. Do they follow those policies for retaining that information? And really, as I alluded to before, it's that top to bottom and bottom to top. It's a multiple levels of questionnaires where you're talking to. Usually, you start out talking to someone in the general counsel office department, and they start including people from maybe the CIO, the CTO, CDO, IT directors, managers, and then it spreads out to the departments in question, right? So if it's a case that involves sales, you're going to be talking to the sales team, maybe the chief revenue officer, directors of sales, VP of sales, and then all down to the frontline people doing cold calling as well as inside sales and things like that, right? Really understanding how the department works, where they keep their data. And some other things that are interesting too is you're going to understand that talking with the home office or the headquarters is going to be different than maybe other offices, right? Satellite offices, smaller offices, offices that were acquired during an acquisition, they're going to vary. That's why it's really important and a good plan to have some written questionnaires that you can send out to people. And if it's a large enough company, nowadays it's simple, really simple to use software to do surveys. Send the questions out, they answer them, and send them back. And there's some other collateral you can get from a company too, depending on its size, about the offices and departments. I think the two really interesting ones here are kind of ones that kind of fly under the radar. It's training information and onboarding information for frontline employees. How are people being trained? What software are they being trained on? Onboarding information for new people. What things are they being trained on as well? There may be gaps there that you find out by looking at information that can come from a manager or maybe HR. IT documentation of all sorts is always helpful. They may have diagrams or IT security information that talks about the applications and things like that. So there's a lot of process discussion so far that we've had. There's surveys, questionnaires, items to look out for. We're going to cover some of those in a little bit. But the employee and witness questionnaires is something that Charles is going to cover. And some cross-industry considerations that I always think that are good to call up here are, there's going to be a difference if you're working on a case that has overseas divisions and offices. They use a lot of contractors or subcontractors that could add data systems that come and go. But also acquisitions and mergers, that changes things. If they divest a division, you may have data that isn't even relevant, so you have to be careful there. Or if employees move around, they were in a department that wasn't part of a in your case, and now they are. So maybe their data is only important for a piece of that time period. And now we're going to talk about some really specific examples of industries, utilities, right? So utilities are highly regulated industry on both the state and federal level, and they have systems that other companies may not have, right? They have a very strong asset management, from counting electric poles to T connectors and pipelines to power plant equipment. There's training requirements for their staff that has to be reported on. Audio communications, transmission information and phone calls that gets recorded, and then employee testing for drugs and alcohol, right? So those are all things that may be captured. Then it's a great example of things that may not come up in your industry that you're working on with your client, but it, down the road may come up in another context for another client. And then for utilities, former systems is a big one. That's kind of that they keep legacy information around. And they use the subcontractors, right? Utilities use subcontractors for all types of work, so that injects other types of data that may change over time depending on a project that a subcontractor could be working on. And those things are stored in SAP, Oracle, Maximo, and other systems. Finance, I've done a lot of work in the financial, fintech, and mortgage area over time, and it's really a vast landscape, right? As I mentioned before, banks are an amalgamation of different entities put together and marketed as one big organization, but they have account and loan information systems, marketing, that includes customer data, call center, audio communications. Every time you call the bank, they're going to record that, right? Customer service, and now maybe even the chatbot, right, that you're talking to on the banking site before you talk to someone in person. And here's some considerations: the acquisitions of banks or divestments of banks as they get bigger and then split apart, and historical systems are some big ones from the financial space. So now it's my pleasure to turn this over for a while to Dave Carnes. As I said, I've known Dave for well over almost 15 years now. He's a great person and legal technology and e-discovery and IT thought leader. So, Dave.
Awesome. Thanks, Brian. I appreciate it. So a little bit of background on me. Next slide would be that I entered the legal technology arena probably in the mid to late 90s, actually during law school. So I'm a lawyer from Illinois, passed the bar, but had already started an IT company in law school that specialized in legal IT. And that led me to working at various firms in an IT capacity. It also led me to then leading e-discovery groups at firms. And then I had a 13-year stay at an e-discovery company itself called CasePoint. And now I'm back as the CIO at a law firm. So Brian and I actually met long ago due to my role as an adjunct professor at Georgetown University, teaching legal IT. And in recent years, I have been a speaker at the ILTA Evolve conference, the ILTACon conference, and other events, often around AI, but in part related to e-discovery as well. So hopefully I have some useful tidbits and insights to share, but my background is varied and but all centered around the legal industry. So next slide. Just a couple of things around the topic of artificial intelligence is just how much we're seeing AI being used in different capacities across the legal industry. Law firms, I mean, the uses are so varied. A lot of firms right now are in the crawl, walk, run kind of phase of artificial intelligence. Some of them are kind of stuck in the summarizing meetings or summarizing documents part of their e-discovery journey. Their artificial intelligence journey. Some are using Gen AI to do things like extracting citations from briefs and kind of turbo boosting the administrative aspects of running a law firm. There's a lot of use around deposition abstracts. I remember one of my first jobs while I was in law school as a young clerk was just doing depo abstracts and summarizing things for the lawyers so they could better spend their time. And now this is almost an automatic process. All you need is a small cadre of good prompts, and you can pull out amazing depo abstracts. But law firms are also using it to create their own internal policies, and we have at our firm a bot to interpret the employee handbook. And then we're also seeing firms using retrieval augmented generation to query documents, extract insights, whether it's a ruling that just came out, internal documents that we've collected and have built a corpus of exemplar documents to pull from. But it's really become a key function of what we do. In the e-discovery use cases, summarizing documents is an easy win and a kind of an obvious hit. Sentiment analysis has been around for a long time, but generative AI has certainly improved that output. And then, there's just so much around automatic categorization of documents based on relevance or privilege or other criteria. But we also see our clients adopting artificial intelligence. And of course, this kind of starts dovetailing into data mapping because they're clearly cultivating repositories of data. Now, sure, they may be summarizing meetings too, which is a pretty easy entrance into the Gen AI world. But they're reviewing resumes, they're creating job descriptions. They're also using retrieval augmented generation on their data to extract value of existing data that they have. But they're also using retrieval augmented generation for things like reviewing a new ruling that came from a governing agency, let's say in the government, and they want to make sure that their internal policies align with the ruling of the governing agency. It's an excellent use of this data, or this technology, but unless you've identified the data, you've mapped the data that you have, and you're able to make quick use of it, it's not nearly as effective and relevant. So that's where I think the data mapping exercise is not only a reactionary process, but it's something that we can use to benefit an organization. And then this also leads to investigators, because what's going to happen is you're going to build this data map, and an investigator is going to take hold of it and say, okay, well, let me ask my own questions about this. And what they're going to do, certainly what I would do, is throw this into a generative AI tool and basically say, hey, please review this data map and suggest 10 questions that I should ask for follow-up of likely gaps of data that are not represented in this data map. And a tool like Claude or ChatGPT, et cetera, is going to do a really good job of teasing out gaps that an investigator could ask about. And then the other thing is, you can imagine a world where lots of companies, of course, have not applied a model to their large corpus of data, and all they have is a document management system or document repositories such as SharePoint to pull from. And that means investigators or others internally may need to just run traditional searches, not generative AI searches, but traditional searches across repositories. Well, what you could do is you could take some exemplar documents that you found through early investigation, and you say, okay, I need to find more like this. And instead of floundering your way around and trying to figure out how to construct the best DT search query, you could feed the document into a system using retrieval augmented generation and say, given this document and its context, please write for me DT search queries that would likely come across documents like this, thereby turbo boosting even traditional search and retrieval strategies that investigators may use. Now, one of the things that Bryant mentioned, and is certainly an issue near and dear to my heart, is this conundrum of every organization of rogue IT, really, which is to say, internal users self-serving and providing their own IT resources that go outside of the company's official ISMS that they may have developed. So the easy example would be, the marketing group who just doesn't like Teams very much for whatever reason, but boy, they sure love Slack. And therefore, they've set up their own instance of Slack where they're really running the marketing department from. And they're just doing this on their own dime. It may not cost very much, but all of a sudden you have a data repository outside of the control of your information security management system. And this happens all the time. I just got a call recently from Dropbox saying, hey, we noticed that 15 of your users are already using Dropbox using your domain, that my law firm's email domain. Would you like to get enterprise licensing? And then it kind of begs the question, like, what do you mean 15 users at my firm are using Dropbox? Thankfully, pulling on that thread, a lot of the time it was because clients actually invited them to a Dropbox repository to pull from. But the tricky part here is with Rogue IT is finding the possible resources that your employees may be self-serving with, trying to uncover through patterns of, like I mentioned with Dropbox, and then making sure that you have policies within your organization to prevent people from engaging in rogue IT, but then also enforcing, rolling back any initiatives that people may have independently undertaken to deploy their own IT services. Because obviously the concern here is if from a data mapping exercise, you can't map the data you don't know about. And I think every organization would be shocked to learn the subtle ways in which employees are actually storing company data in their own repositories. And the terrifying one, I'll just give an example for everybody, is ask any executive at any organization whether they keep notes in their Apple Notes, including screenshots of whiteboards that are in the company, or possibly just notes that they take in the middle of meetings that are not being backed up into your OneNote or other repositories, but rather in their private Apple iCloud repositories. So rogue IT is a very real thing. It's not talked about nearly as much, but when we're talking about data mapping, it's something that we need to be concerned about. Next slide. So look, I mean, just from my perspective, data mapping is important for so many reasons. Not the least of which is I'm new to my organization. I've been here for about 18 months. When I came in, I just wanted to know where everything was. And the last time we ran a data map had been years prior. So filling in the gaps, trying to figure out the totality of your information management system is important for any organization. But then, what happens is whatever the maps that are gathered at some point, people like me might rely on this to determine what my in-scope applications would be for ISO 27001 certification or for SOC 2. And if there are gaps in that data map, you may very well be presenting to auditors a lot of misinformation in how you're pulling together in-scope applications. So it's such a foundational process to undertake, and it's much better to do it all along the way. But if you have to do it in a reactionary format, understood. But if you can do it along the way, and that helps builds models to better understand how our data is existing throughout the enterprise. Now, as I mentioned, this is getting super complicated. It used to be back in the day where you could go back into a server room and all you had to do was point to each server on the rack and say, well, what does this one do and what does that one do? And slowly but surely you'd be able to uncover your entire footprint. Now, many organizations are cloud first, so we have to understand all of our SaaS applications, all of our IaaS applications, all of our PaaS sources that we're using. We need to understand if mobile apps are storing data of our enterprise. Most organizations do have a very poor handle as to how many servers are actually running virtual machines inside of them, and understanding the purpose and the data that's stored in those VMs. And then there's, of course, the cadre of contractors and subcontractors in any organization. We use an outside company to help us with our cybersecurity posture, and they indeed carry data on our behalf in their management systems, and that would extend, some of our enterprise data extends into their infrastructure. And then, possibly the most troubling topic that is befuddling and on my mind a lot is, I guess, what we would call, broadly speaking, modern data, which really is the equivalent of just saying a Google Drive link or a Microsoft SharePoint link, where, let's say, Bryant were to send to me, a SharePoint link to this presentation that we're working on. The link is not an attachment to an email, if that's how he communicated to me with. The link, from an SMTP perspective, is just simply a set of characters that actually have no specific meaning. But when the link is interpreted by a web interpreter, it would direct me to an online repository. Now, just because Bryant sends me a link to a PowerPoint presentation does not mean that I actually have access to it. How many times have any of us asked for someone's opinion on something we were drafting, and it's in a Google Drive link or it's in a SharePoint link, and it turns out you didn't actually give them rights to the document, so they have to request access? Well, that's not clear at all when you are collecting this data downstream or when you're building a data map. Lots of links are thrown around. It doesn't mean that people have access to them. And it also doesn't mean they had access to a document at the time the email was sent that the link was included in. You could imagine someone sending you a link on January 1st that says, hey, will you please check out this contract? And on January 1st, the recipient did not have access to the URL. But later on, 2 weeks later, they said, oh, I'm so sorry, I meant to give you access, you now have access to it. But the contents of the link data has completely changed. The contract had gone through multiple revisions. So there's this whole issue of, when did I receive a link? Did I have access to it? And has the document underlying data changed since I received it? And a lot of that is not well teased out in many of these exercises that we go through, whether it be data mapping or collection. And then the additional complication of who owns the data. So we deal with this as a law firm all the time, where our clients will send us a link to a document they're working on and asking for our legal opinion. Well, they don't send us a document, they just send us a link to a SharePoint location that they've given us access to. But now we're providing legal opinion on something that we don't even have ownership of, and we can't keep for posterity in our records. And that causes a lot of issues of thinking about what modern data like linked data means for the control, access, and tracking of the data that we have. So it's a big issue. There are some folks that are trying to build solutions around this. Microsoft Purview has a bunch of nice functionality that they've integrated with Microsoft Modern Attachments. But there's no silver bullet yet. So I think the real import here is just to make sure you're aware of these issues and you're talking about it when going through your data mapping exercise. This might be the end of the slides for me, but let's just check, Bryant. Great. So that's those are some of my thoughts, but now I'm going to turn things over to Charles.
Thanks, Dave. So next slide, please. So hi, everyone. I'm Charles Suji. I'm a director here at Celerity Consulting Group. I've been doing e-discovery for 21 years. I started off scanning boxes of paper, and then I learned how to process data and then to create summation and concordance load databases. So for those of you on the call that are familiar with our area, that might date me a little bit. But after that, I did a short stint as an e-discovery attorney at a law firm where I counseled clients on their ESI agreements, drafting their RFPs to make sure that they were asking the right questions to get the electronic data that they needed. But that's also where I got my first exposure to doing custodian interviews and data mapping. And now my main practice area is the processing, hosting, review, and production of documents. So that middle part of the EDRM that Brian had talked about earlier. But I do still get involved with projects that have custodian interviews, which is what I'm going to be talking about next. So next slide, please. So why is data mapping important? I think both Brian and Dave has given some great great answers. As it relates to the e-discovery process and my cases in particular, I'm getting data handed off to me from our collections team. And so I'm confident that, they've identified the right custodians, they've identified the right data sources. So when they're saying, hey, Charles, here's the email, here's the network data, here's the custodial data, I know that we have everything that could be related to the case so that we can then put that into a review database so that our attorneys can go find the documents that they need for their to win their litigation. The other thing is really important because you don't want to find a gap or you don't want to have any surprises. You don't want to have like a week before your deadline and have someone say, oh, hey, here's 100,000 more emails that we need to review before Friday's deadline because we forgot about, this file server. Or if there are things that pop up, opposing counsel might latch onto those and they may start to ask, well, what other things might you have missed? So it is really important to make sure that you have a good data mapping, you have good questions, you've interviewed all the right people. So as it relates to the custodial interview process, the first thing I always like to do is to talk to the team leadership. This could be, the project manager, the team lead, or the director, or the VP, or the division chief, because they can give you the lay of the land before you talk to IT. They can tell you, are you looking at having to interview hundreds of custodians or just, tens of custodians? They might also be able to give you some background as to where the data is going to be located, like what file servers do they use? Do they use Slack or Teams for their communications? And that it also will allow you to take that background so that when you do go to the next step, which is to talk to IT, IT will tell you, okay, here's our mail servers, here's our backup practices, here are the file servers that we use, here are the policies that we've implemented on each of the employees' laptops. But since you've already talked to leadership, you'll have some background so you can then follow up with IT to ask about anything that leadership might have brought up. And then both of these groups of people are important because they can then talk to their colleagues and give them a heads up. Hey, we're working with this company called Celerity. They're going to be sending you some emails. They're going to be asking you to fill out a survey or a questionnaire. It's not a phishing attempt. I just did some training yesterday where we got some good examples of what's phishing. And so you don't want the custodians to just ignore your emails. You want to make sure that they're going to respond to you. So after you've talked to leadership and to IT, you should have a good idea of the universe of people you might need to interview. And if it's a lot of people, one thing we like to suggest is to send out a preliminary questionnaire. And this could just be one question. And it could say, here's what this case is about. Do you have any documents related to this case? Yes or no? And then from there, people will answer yes or no, and you can remove anyone that said no from any follow-up that you need to do. And then you can send out a more detailed questionnaire. And so this will be, did you work on this case? What type of, did you send email? Did you create Word documents or Office documents? Where are they stored? Did you save anything to a cloud storage device like Dropbox or Google Drive or OneDrive? Did you SharePoint sites? All those normal questions that you could ask based on the information that you've gotten from the data mapping that you've already done. And then once the custodians have responded to those surveys, we then schedule interviews with those that have confirmed that they do have data, and then they've explained the types of data that they have. And when we conduct those interviews, we have their answers in front of us, and we always go through each of the questions. So we'll say, okay, for question 1, you've answered A, B, and C. Is that still correct? And a lot of times they'll just say yes, but once in a while someone will say, yes, but I also forgot to add D and E. And so this is a good way to make sure you're getting all the information that you need, and that it gives them, the custodians, an opportunity to supplement any of their answers. And also, we found once in a while, someone might tell us, "Oh, I thought you meant this by this question, so I answered it this way." And so it gives you again, that opportunity to clarify the question you're asking. Um, Sort of no matter how hard you try to make the questions as clear and as straightforward as possible, there's always going to be a handful of people that might misinterpret it. So doing the interviews and having their answers when you're doing that interviews is a good way to confirm that. And the last thing is tracking and reporting. So this kind of goes in parallel with everything that we've already talked about. So you want to make sure that you have really good documentation. It could be something as simple as an Excel log for a very small project, or a big database for something with a lot of interviews or a lot of custodians. But you want to make sure that you have a way to tell what was the universe of custodians that you started with. Uh, how many did you send the questionnaire to? How many responded, yes, they have data? How many did you interview? And then how many interviews were complete? Because I get asked that a lot, so I always have to make sure that I can get that information very, very quickly. Next slide, please. So best practices. And so this very first one here, I have my own example of rogue IT that both Brian and David talked about earlier. So this first bullet point is just saying to make sure that you talk to people at every level, or at different levels within the organization. And so the very first case that I worked on, I had a call with the director of IT, and he was great. He explained email servers, network servers, everything that we needed. And he made it very clear that nobody is allowed to save data to external flash drives. So it's great, right? Very, very clear. So then we interviewed the manager, and he confirmed, yes, email file servers, no external hard drives. But he did say, oh, we use a SharePoint site for 2 weeks for some reasons. And so we added the SharePoint site to our list. And then I got to the people that were on the team that were doing the work. Again, they confirmed everything: email, file server, SharePoint. And the first person said, oh, and we saved data on flash drives. And I asked them, isn't there a policy you're not supposed to save data to flash drive? And said, yeah, but sometimes we just need to get data transferred. We were in the field, so we just saved it quickly to flash drives. And so then I asked, well, how many flash drives do you have in this? Oh, there's a box in my office of flash drives. So we then made sure that we asked everybody about the flash drives, if they had any. And another person I interviewed on the same project said, oh, in addition to flash drives, there's a computer in so-and-so's office that we use to burn CDs. And there's a stack of CDs in their office that has data related to this case. So from that process, I learned, you always, if we had stopped after those first 2 interviews, we would have missed out on the flash drives and those CDs. So you always want to make sure that you're talking to people at different levels. Confirmation is very important. And so I kind of went over this a little bit already, but if you're reviewing someone's responses and something looks maybe a little inconsistent, or it's not quite the same as some of their other colleagues, you do want to make sure to ask them about it. I had a case where the entire team told me that they saved data, I think it was to the P drive. And there was one person that said, I saved my files to the M drive. And I wasn't sure, I couldn't see their computer at the time. So when we did the actual interview, I had them open up their computer and show me the M drive. And you can probably guess it was just mapped to a different letter. It was still the P drive, but for whatever reason on this one person's laptop, it was the M drive. So it's very easy. We just made a note that the M drive was actually the P drive. We didn't have to go collect data from a brand new server. And then lastly, documentation. We have our own Celerity forms that we fill out when we're doing these interviews, and that we take to for the interviews in person. We have it in paper. For doing it electronically, like we do a lot now, via over the web, for Zoom or something, we have it electronic. And we make sure that we have a completed form for every interview. We make sure that our tracking is up to date, so that we can do any reporting that we have to when our clients ask us, can you give us a status? So having very good documentation is really, really important. And so the last thing is, the changes connected to AI. I know that AI is this new thing. It seems very popular. It feels like everybody is using it. And so there's just tons of data that's being analyzed by AI, and people are using prompts to go and to kind of sift through all that information. And so now it's possible that those prompts might be discoverable. And so it would be a good idea to add a question to your questionnaire asking about the use of AI in within that organization. Many years ago, we had to add a new question that said, do you store data on cloud devices, cloud storage devices? So this is when Dropbox and Google Drive were just kind of starting to get very popular and brand new. So now I think we're going to have to make sure that we ask about AI, because those prompts are sort of going into the program, and the users may or may not know where that data is being stored. So if they are using AI, we'll need to make sure that we talk back to IT so that we can get at that information if it's possible. So I think that's the end of my slides. I think I'll turn this back over to Bryant.
Thanks, Charles. We're almost close to being out of time, so I'll go quick here. Other things to understand when you're thinking about data mapping is the type of action. As I mentioned, you don't want to overbuild. You don't need to build a battleship when maybe it's just a rowboat will do for what you're working on. Litigation investigations, they have different purposes, right? So maybe your data map is a little different. Make sure you're doing the right amount of work. Don't overdo it. Don't underdo it, right? And the more you do this, the better you'll get at it. Internal investigations or government investigations come with different requirements as well. And a way to get good at this is start, if you haven't done this before, start trying to do a data map on your own organization, right? You can talk to the people internally and how to figure out what systems people are using. Other items we've already discussed, rogue IT. I think it's really interesting. I used to think of this as shadow IT, but that sounded too nefarious and too with too much ill intent. A lot of times it's just people trying to do their job better and faster. It's maybe if you're doing white collar criminal work or just criminal work, there's more intent in doing something for a nefarious reason. So that's something to think about. The modern data point that Dave makes is excellent. Who had access to it when and what version is really interesting. It's the provenance of a document. Could a case turn on that? It could. And then to what Charles was talking about, the data mapping questions, the questionnaires and surveys and confirming. I kind of think about it this way too. It's like, trust the information from the organizations, but confirm, right? Evolving landscapes. About 8 years ago, 2016 was the first time I ran into a company like this, and it was very interesting. It wasn't a cloud first organization. It was a cloud only organization. They had basically laptops and the internet. That was it. Everything they used was a cloud based, a SaaS based piece of software. So when we were trying to do a collection for a government investigation, it was very interesting because they had no access or control beyond what they had as an admin remoting into it across the web, right? So every export, from these 30 systems was very slow and tedious. But really the underlying thing that I took away from this was two parts. It was the dynamic of people are going to be using SaaS software to make their companies more dynamic and save money, keep up with new features. But the other thing I ran into for the first time was Slack. It was really interesting because they were using Slack for a number of their platforms. The one that caught my attention was finance. And before this, when looking at financial data, we'd go to the financial databases and pull information. Those were the databases records and the reports, and maybe reports that they would generate on a regular basis, quarterly or yearly, for different executives. This was different though, because it really changed my understanding and with these collaborative systems of what a database record was, right? Sure, the database for the financial department was still the database of record, but this Slack information about it provided the context, and it was a secondary, as important database of record about the discussions about the reports, about who's doing the reports, what they contained at certain times. So it was a very interesting thing to think about. That collaboration changes not only where you get the information, right? 'Cause some of those reports are in Slack, you're sending them from one person to another, but actually the context of those reports. I thought it was very interesting, and another area and how you're not just collecting it because there's a report there, but there's actually information about all the reports potentially. So for our artificial intelligence, just repeat this, because these powerful tools rely upon the data to find information and patterns and structures in your data. If you don't have all your data, the modeling could be wrong. There could be gaps in the data, which both impact and affect your end results, right? And you don't want procedural issues, and you don't want to be missing something that either helps you or hurts you. And for key takeaways, really it's about getting some experience doing data mapping so you're ready for it for your next case. It provides great insights. It allows you to have conversations across the organization, find out more about your client. These data footprints are going to be changing and evolving, just like my example about Slack and how that like really changed my understanding of what a database record is and could be. And then you need to have all your data and you need to have a process, right? Both for understanding how to use data mapping, but also how to use the tools, your AI tools that rely on the data you're collecting. Any questions?
Great job, guys. This is Bob again. I want to quickly thank the three of our speakers today for researching and presenting this pretty hot topic. I mean, the exponential growth of data is not going away. It's going to keep getting bigger with AI, the advent of that and the growth and the understanding and adoption of it, having a plan and understanding what you have, how to use it, where to find it, how to map it, et cetera, is more important than ever. So again, great job, guys. I've got a couple of questions here. I know we're running a little bit long on time, but I'm going to throw these out real quick. If you guys could choose who would answer them. I've got a question that came in from, I'll paraphrase. It says, what QC mechanisms could be implemented to ensure the accuracy and relevancy of data that is produced through the data mapping process?
So the accuracy and relevancy of the data mapping, that you caught all the information, all the systems. I think there's two pieces of it. You can look at, when you're processing data, you assign identifiers to sources of data that if you have sources of data that don't end up in your review process or your production process that you think should be there, that I think that's a big identifier of a gap. What's the second part of the question, Bob?
Just they were asking if they're to ensure the accuracy and relevancy of the data that's produced throughout the mapping process. So just overall asking about what QC mechanisms could you use?
Yeah, and then the other piece of it, I think, once you identify that all of your sources have been put into your that you need or want into your review process, no matter if you're doing a TAR or CAL or maybe some hybrid or maybe even an old school linear review, which not many people do anymore. I think that helps with that. But you can also cross-reference, like I said, your sources of data that you produce versus all your sources to see if there's gaps of things that should maybe have been produced.
Great, excellent. Another quick question for the team. I know that every case is different, right? Some are more lengthy and complex than others, but in general or roughly, how long does the overall data mapping process take for your average size case?
I'll start on the first part of that, and then maybe I'll have Charles jump in as well. For the initial getting the lay of the landscape, generally that can be done talking to, like we talked about at the top of the ladder and the bottom. At the top, with the general counsel, some people from IT, and some managers and directors. That's maybe 3 to 5 phone calls, maybe an hour each, and we can pull together a pretty good understanding of what we have. Then if we need to do a survey and reach out to people, it's really dependent upon how many people we have to survey. Charles, what do you think, for an average survey per person, how long does that usually take you to prepare for and then actually execute on?
Yeah, so setting up the surveys is pretty straightforward. We just usually work with our clients to make sure we're getting the right questions to ask and we have the right list of people to reach out to. Um, It really depends, and I hate that answer, but it depends on the recipients because we need them to actually respond. And so we typically set stuff up where, we send out the questionnaire and then we send follow-up emails every week for a couple of weeks. And then if they still aren't responding, then we have to reach out to their managers or their supervisors to get them to actually respond to us. So it could be, if you're lucky, they'll get everything done in a couple days, but it usually takes weeks. And then once you get to the interview process, it always surprises me at how long it takes to schedule interviews. But people are busy, they're trying to find time in their schedules that works for everyone. And so that could be a lengthy process just depending on their availability. Even if the interview is, 10 or 15 minutes, it could just take some time to get all of that scheduled.
Great. And then kind of dovetailing off that question, again, knowing that every case and every data mapping project is going to be different levels of complexity and time and length, roughly what does it cost to do this kind of thing? And not necessarily at Celerity, but in your all collective experience, are we talking tens of thousands of dollars, hundreds of thousands, or millions? What roughly, what do you think?
Well, it's definitely, I'm sorry for laughing. It's definitely not millions.
All right.
I, yeah. I think for a small investigation, it would probably be a couple $1,000s, right? Depending on, I've worked on some very large cases with thousands of custodians at issue or hundreds of custodians, and those can take a long time just to understand the whole landscape for all those people across organizations that span the globe, right? So those would be, maybe $100,000. Smaller ones are going to be thousands or tens of thousands of dollars. And two, this is something that, once you do it once, you become much better at it. You know what questions to ask. You can get to your end result faster, right? So I think over time, there's certain things that you kind of learn what questions to ask. And then, Charles and, I have a lot of experience at is looking at the inconsistencies of answers to questions to see if there's a there. Usually there's not. There's usually just, oh, people answered the question incorrectly or they didn't understand it, to what Charles alluded to. There's usually not a lot of hiding of things. Sometimes maybe different organizations have different cultures, and there's always people that just don't want to answer questions. Or maybe there's a cultural thing if you're doing work across, in foreign territories or countries, right?
Okay.
But
That
usually
makes sense.
it's not $1 million. It's generally not $100,000. It's generally something that maybe, depending on the initial set, dozens of hours, and then a certain amount of hours per custodian to do, if you need to do a lot of custodian interviews. So
Excellent. Well, last two questions, and we'll wrap up and kind of tie everything together here. What overall, 100%, what percent of clients that you guys have worked with actually take part in a data mapping project? Is it a low percentage or 100% or somewhere in between?
hmm, I'll answer it this way. I think it really depends on the type of industry and the type of litigation or investigation, right? Highly regulated industries they probably have some of that information already down. And so, but they always have to you always have to refresh it for a new case, right? For smaller organizations, it's more of a triage type of situation. Think of an organization that hasn't been through litigation before, is being sued for the first or second time. Maybe they have one or two offices. That's going to be very different than looking at a Fortune 100 company, right? So it really varies.
Okay.
But for the big ones, I would say you always have to do some type of data mapping as a refresh exercise. For those small organizations, it's going to be starting from scratch and just doing what's needed, because it's very foreign to them. B, it's going to be very expensive, and C, you may not, there may not be a lot to actually map as well.
Excellent. All right, well, tell you what, let's wrap up since we're running a little bit long. This has been really great. If you want to go to the final slide, and I'll kind of bring it home for us. Again, I just want to thank everybody on the call for attending. as we put these webinars and white papers and blog articles together, and they're all educational based in nature. And our goal is to help educate the market on things they need to know to improve their overall organizations and results of what they do. So again, I really appreciate you being here and the questions that were posed. And also thank you to the three speakers, and especially Dave Carnes, our third-party speaker from the client side. Really great stuff, and we look forward to hopefully doing another webinar with you again soon. Real briefly, as mentioned earlier in the show, tomorrow morning or in the early afternoon, we'll send you out a quick email with a link to the post-webinar page where you can achieve the three things on the dots there below. And then lastly, I'd like to also just kind of give you a heads up for those of you that might be involved on the vegetation management side of e-discovery or data management. Our other division of our company, ClearPath Vegetation Management Group, will be hosting a webinar discussing our new RCA program, which is called Risk Compliance Assessments, on November 20th. So stay tuned for some invites on that. We hope to see you there. So again, thank you, everybody. Have a wonderful day or night wherever you're at, and we'll catch you on another webinar soon.